So we're excited to have Jonathan Allen here, who's a chaplain for Hospice of North Carolina, Charlotte.
Actually, Hospice and Palliative Care of the Charlotte region. It's a mouthful.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Gerald. Gerald, pardon me. That's the second time I've done that, and Chuck as well. It's really great to be here. Before I get started, I'll just happen to say that the last time that my family and I were down here in downtown, it just happened to be at the game at which the Carolina Panthers decided that this is it, we can't take any more, we're signing Cam Newton. So we were there for the loss of the Patriots, and surprisingly 2 weeks later, here we are. So thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's certainly great to be here. Let me commend you, my heavens, when my co-worker at Hospice got me in touch with Gerald and said this group of folks is taking a deep dive and looking at the aspects, the religious and spiritual aspects and taking good care toward yourself at the end of life, and asked me to join. I was thrilled to do so. Looking back at the 3 weeks that you've had previously, and the discussions you've had, I can't commend you anymore. You know, I personally believe that we live in a society where we do everything we possibly can to even avoid the assumption that we're going to grow old and we're going to decline and we're going to die. All you have to do is turn on the TV or look at any social media. You can either take a pill or drink this drink or sign off for this, whatever you have it, or drive this car or buy this iPhone, and it'll keep you young at heart. There is no magic pill. There certainly is no fountain of youth. And we happen to be one of the only cultures in civilization as 21st century Americans that do that. Every other civilization said that we know that death is a part of life, it's unavoidable. So why not, take it as a part of what we know is going to happen, and embrace it and learn more about it, and treat it as the reality that it is. And so that's what you're doing. And I, again, can't commend you more for that. So thank you for allowing me to be here. A little bit about myself. I used to spend a good amount of time in downtown Charlotte. For a number of years, I worked at the Charlotte Observer building, which is no longer. I happened to be there the morning that the Twin Towers were demolished. And that really started a process, an internal process for me to determine what do I want to do with the rest of my life. And over a long and slow deep dive, psychologically, philosophically, I determined, I said, hey, I think I want to go to seminary. I don't know what I want to do or be after seminary, but that's what I want to do. That was not a decision that came easily or lightly or slowly. My beautiful wife and daughter in the background were very much a part of that decision. But we certainly worked through that, and I did indeed decide that my future, whatever it was going to be, required seminary, and I thought I was going to be a pastor. So that's what you do. Luckily, my advisor there he began to learn more about me and my characteristics and how I was skilled and gifted, and he said, I think you might have the makings of a good chaplain. And lo and behold, here I am, and I'm so grateful that he did. So this is certainly a second career for me. I've only been a board certified chaplain for 5 years, but I love it. I tell people it is as awful as it is amazing. It is often awful because folks, families, patients, and families have not done the work that you're doing here. And they've avoided trying to look at end of life and look at decline and death, and it comes as a shock to them. And so we come in the middle of turmoil and upheaval and family dynamics and all this and that, and that can make it awful. But it's also amazing because I walk into homes as a chaplain. I'm an invited guest, truly, but oftentimes within a very short period of time, folks that either haven't had the opportunity or haven't allowed themselves to have the opportunity to talk about these heavy things that have been on their mind and heart and spirit, do so willingly and in amazing ways. And it is so powerful how close we can connect in such a short period of time. And I think that's because the reality of what's happening has been stripped away. And you've seen it in movies, you've read it in books. When stuff gets real, that's when it's time to talk about the core and to really get centered on who you are, what you believe about where you come from, end of life, what happens after end of life, and to work through that. So it's a beautiful, beautiful process, and I'm certainly blessed to be able to do it. So brief bit about hospice. It's not that old of an organization worldwide. It was started in 1967. And interestingly enough, it crossed the pond very quickly. And the first hospice in the United States was set up in Connecticut in 1974. And even more exciting than that, Hospice of Charlotte started in 1978. So only 4 years after the first hospice came to the United States, we had one here in Charlotte. It has had a number of iterations and name changes over the year, and we now have become Hospice and Palliative Care of the Charlotte region. I have to remind myself what that is, because we don't just serve Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. We serve the contiguous counties within roughly a 40-mile radius, every county that touches Mecklenburg County, as well as Lawrence County in South Carolina. We've picked that up recently. So we are a nonprofit. Our revenue goes towards patient care, facilities, grief care in the community, and an ongoing support of the high clinical standards that we've become known for. We are very reliant on the gifts that folks offer us through either donations made through obituaries or aftercare. People are so moved they want to give, and we steward that money very, very carefully and very, very closely, and we pour it all back into the community, into our organization. So a brief definition: hospice care is holistic and comfort driven. We treat the body, the mind, and the spirit of the patient, and we provide support to their caregiving circle of family and friends. The philosophy of hospice considers death to be a normal part of the life cycle, as I spoke about earlier. And the aim is to provide terminally ill patients with comfort and dignity, which supports quality of life rather than quantity of life. I spoke about the body, mind, spirit connection. That's one of the greatest things I love about hospice. Not just because they employ me, but because they take it seriously that the dear folks that we care for are not a list of symptoms to be treated. They are individuals made in the image of God with his creative spark, and they deserve every bit of love and dignity and respect that we possibly can. And in order to do that, we want to treat them holistically, body, mind, and spirit. Oftentimes, patients complain of pain, but on the medical side, we can't get the dials right. We don't know the right medications to give them or what to take away and what to add. Pain can often be related toward end of life or spiritual pain. And so that's where we step in. And oftentimes when folks can either unburden themselves or get answers to the burning questions that they've had for many, many years, that can make a tremendous difference. So that existential pain can present itself as physical pain. And so for me to be able to go into homes as well as into long-term care facilities, whether they be assisted living facilities, nursing homes, memory care, it's an honor to do so. It really is. Oh, and back to me. I work out of the Lake Norman office, and I have all of the patients that are both served in their homes as well as in those long-term communities. in the Huntersville and in the Cornelius area. I also have the honor of being our pediatric chaplain as well. Obviously, those numbers are fewer and far between. So I serve that whole gigantic circle around Mecklenburg County. So, and unfortunately, there are families that are forced to make awful decisions with their sometimes newborns, sometimes 12-year-old and 15 and 16-year-olds. And when they have the courage to call in hospice, we show up. That program is called Kids Path. And it's marvelous. We've got information about that if anybody is interested. I didn't bring anything, no handouts, no. So I apologize for that, but certainly Gerald will know how to get in touch with me if any of you have questions that arise afterwards. And yeah, any questions that arise during this, please feel free.
I may be jumping the gun, but what's the difference between hospice care and palliative care?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely get there. Thanks for the segue. We're close to that. We're close. The eligibility for patients to enter and start receiving hospice service is basically they have been given a diagnosis to the best medical knowledge of the provider that they have 6 months or less to live. Generally, that's clearly because of a diagnosis of a life-threatening and life-altering illness. And unfortunately, let me mention that there are lots of people that get so dialed into that 6-month number. And I certainly wish that we would find a different way to rephrase that, because human nature immediately tells you, let me go to the calendar, let me flip forward 6 months, and this is the general window when I'm going to die. That is not the case at all, And a lot of what we do is some re-education for folks, demystification. There certainly comes a point in time, and I'm thrilled to tell you that many of our medical folks realize that there's a point in time where medical science and biotechnology can no longer tell you what your time frame is. It's up to God, and it truly is. And my phraseology often is, nobody knows how many heartbeats you have left and how many breaths you have left except God at this point. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So the primary eligibility requirement of hospice is if the doctor says that in 6 months or less, the illness is expected is to take its expected course, and the patient is not receiving curative treatment aimed at cure, but are requesting aggressive comfort measures. So we basically have, as an example, cancer patients that say, okay, I want hospice care and I want to get all the services, but I'm still doing chemo. We need to have a further conversation about that. Related to the 6-month mark, I will also say that we have had patients under our care for literally years, simply because sometimes when patients come into our care and we take away a lot of medications that are counteracting upon each other, they're getting bombarded with personal care. They've got a nurse, they've got a chaplain, they've got a social worker, they've got a volunteer coming to see them. Sometimes that social interaction brings people alive, so to speak. And for folks that have been isolated, especially for the past 18 months through COVID, that you see them dwindling and fading, unfortunately, sometimes that aggressive, intentional care really perks people back up. And they can rally. There are even times, it's not often, but we will discharge folks and we'll call graduate them because they're doing well enough that we can't ethically claim to Medicare that they need our services anymore. And so we will graduate folks. Palliative, that's a great point. Palliative care is for folks that do have a medical diagnosis, generally something that will take their lives, but they don't have that likelihood of 6 months or less life to live. And so we will step in and still offer them care. And it's a really great entryway, if you will, into hospice. So They'll see a nurse practitioner and a nurse on a not as frequent basis as hospice, but at least there's a foot in the door without all the baggage that term can bring. To when the time does come, the palliative care team can have a conversation with the hospice team and say, we might think it's time.
Different funding sources,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Palliative is more private pay.
And Medicare B, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's correct. Let's see where on these notes I can tell you that. Yeah, so indeed, hospice care is, you don't have to pay for it. It's Medicare A, VA benefit, and many private insurance policies pay for it. I can tell you, unfortunately, our pediatric patients obviously don't get Medicare A, but our social workers work very, very closely with them to get sources at a county level and others that might be. I don't have on here how Medicare, or excuse me, how palliative, oh wait, here, I may just, hold on. Yes, palliative care is covered by Medicare Part B and private insurance. Yeah. Any other questions related to what you've heard so far? Okay, great. So, as mentioned, we do serve the 9-county region in Lawrence, South Carolina. Most of our patients have a primary caregiver. It's usually an adult child, but not always. Some folks don't have anyone. And I've had court-appointed guardians that are considered the caregiver. I've had folks that have a best friend who they've made their medical power of attorney. So that's not always the case, especially in a city like ours that's bursting at the seams and people are moving here from all over the country, and they've left their network of folks back home or wherever it may be. So it's not a cookie cutter at all. We contract with Atrium, Novant, Carolina, Lake Norman Regional, and all the hospitals within a 60-mile radius, as well as those nursing homes and independent or assisted living facilities that I mentioned. You probably heard about and maybe even seen about our hospice houses. That necessitates a little bit of definition as well. There's much belief in the general public that when I'm sick enough, I will go to the hospice house and I'll die. That might be the case, but the best way to think about the hospice house is as a hospital for hospice. So the majority, the balance of care from hospice is delivered in the home. So you're in your familiar surroundings, you're in your confines, in your bed for the most part, until you might need a hospital bed. But when the time comes that there is either pain that can't be treated in the home effectively, or there are other symptoms that can't be treated effectively, there will be a referral made to the hospice house, of which we have a number. We've got our flagship is in the Huntersville area. We've got a couple in Charlotte. We've got one in Shelby, and then again in South Charlotte area. And oftentimes when that crisis is managed and the patient is well enough to be treated back at home, if and when that day arrives, they go back home and they get treated there. So much like a hospital. There are many folks that don't. We call those terminal stays, and they die in the hospice house in a very respectful and loving and beautiful way. I do believe by all means there is such a thing as a good death. There is a hospice, there's a chaplain that is dedicated to and at the hospice house to care for those folks and families and staff as well. So that's a little bit about the hospice house. Let's see here, setting up services. So anybody can refer a patient, but they generally come, our referrals generally come from primary care physicians or physicians at the hospital. As well as we do have hospital liaisons that are in communication with staff there. It's not, they're not roaming the halls with a black with a Skype and a black thing. Look, they're not the angel of death, but when it comes time to have those conversations, our hospital liaisons can have those conversations with hospital staff, and then get the ball rolling there. Generally, the way that process starts is a nurse from our referral center will meet with the patient and their representative, their loved one, either in their home or in the hospital or in whatever care facility they happen to be living in at the time. They will explain services. They will evaluate the patient's condition. They will review current medical needs, including medication. And then most patients are seen at least twice a week by the nurse, but that can vary depending on need. There are some patients that need to be seen every day. There are some that only want to be seen every other week. And that can happen based on a conversation that we have. And there's no cookie cutter of what a hospice intake looks like. Once that referral is taken by our referring nurse, a primary nurse is assigned and a social worker is assigned. Every family must meet with a nurse and a social worker, and then a nurse practitioner is on scene as well. On occasion, the doctor will visit, but generally not. We have very few of them, and they're working hard behind the scenes to do everything that needs to be done. The nurse practitioner is basically who picks up that role and will visit the patient when necessary. A chaplain is optional. There are plenty of times when, for instance, if one of your loved ones is here at First Presbyterian and you have a wonderful network of support and your pastoral care staff is giving them great support, then no, I think we're good. Other times that may be the case, but if the patient is lonely or they feel like they're not getting enough support, then by all means, I will step in. And I always say, it is never incumbent upon me to feel like I am jumping ahead of your pastor or ahead of your church. I'm just a complimentary opportunity to serve and provide whatever you need on a psychosocial and spiritual and emotional level. The nurse makes visits according to the physical needs of the patient. The social worker sets up an appointment for any psychosocial needs that the patient or the caregivers may have. And that's basically non-physical needs such as counseling, setting up volunteers and chaplains. And by the way, we're just now getting back to the point because of COVID that we can have volunteers back into the home. So that was very touch and go for a while, but we're easing back into that. So for the past year and a half, our volunteers had unfortunately been sidelined, but we rely on them so much. They are just a crucial part of our team. And certainly social workers understand and can share information on how to access programs in the community that folks can take advantage of, either at a city, a town, or a county level, state level even. So, Huntersville may have support that Pineville doesn't. So those folks know what's available there. One of our unsung heroes on the medical team is the CNA, the certified nursing assistant, that will come in and provide that very, very delicate but important role in your loved one's life in terms of physical needs like bathing and personal care. It is optional, but it certainly can provide relief for the caregiver and comfort for the patient. And I'll tell you, those folks are amazing. And oftentimes, when you're able to connect with somebody at that intimate a level, and that trust has been won, if you will, patients often share things with their CNAs that they never would share with me or the nurse or what have you. And so they come back and they'll say, oh, you remember that problem we've been having with this patient? I figured it out. They told me. Wow, it's an amazing thing. I think it's a spiritual thing when that happens, quite honestly. But we very quickly make such, often very quickly, more often make really good connections with folks, and they learn to trust us very, very quickly. Let's see. Again, we have over 300 volunteers that provide many services: respite for the caregivers, assistance with transportation, tasks in the home, and support for the hospice team. Our volunteers quite often come from caregivers of loved ones who have taken advantage of our service, and once their loved one has died, in a short period of time, they're like, I love hospice, I've got to get involved. How do I sign up? And for their own good and health, we say, you don't, for at least a year. You need to grieve. You need to work through the process. Don't jump right back in and make rash decisions real quickly. You need your own time to kind of settle down. But in a year's time, give us a call. We'll plug you in. God forbid another pandemic hadn't rolled around by then. We also have grief counseling, which is a tremendous service. It is offered up to 13 months after the loved one has died for that caregiver and for families. That is tremendous impact. And so many people can't afford a counselor or a therapist, and it's a free service to them. In fact, that grief counseling arm of our organization extends out into the community. You don't have to be within the hospice realm or have had a hospice patient in order to take advantage of that. Folks come to us by a number of different ways, and we get them plugged in with a grief counselor. And it's a beautiful, beautiful opportunity for them. There are newsletters that go out. There are individual and group counseling that takes place. There are memorial services and holiday remembrances. We, in years past, not this year or the last year, were able to do Light Up a Life at the holiday season, which is where families that have lost loved ones, not just in the year, but in years past, will come together and offer these memory making and memorial building opportunities through readings, through song, through a homily, which I have given. And it's just beautiful, especially at the holiday time, which understandably you may have experienced the grief at a time that is so jovial in the community, but in your heart of hearts, how in the world can anybody celebrate at a time like this? So we certainly are quite aware and take advantage of that opportunity. Let's see here. Yeah, so we talked about that. We talked about obituary care, or at least how we receive funds, often through obituaries. So just to quickly wrap up, why should you rely on hospice and palliative care in the Charlotte region? We can be extremely responsive to needs on short notice, 24/7, 365. Oftentimes, there will be immediate issues on a Saturday morning at 3 a.m. And if it's in the hospital, for instance, they can get in touch with our hospital liaison that calls our 24 service care line, get the ball rolling immediately. So in a very, very short period of time, we can come on board. We are indeed the largest and the most trusted not-for-profit hospice and palliative care medicine provider in the Carolinas, and we're proud to say we've been here for over 40 years. We're not the Johnny-come-lately. We provide excellent personalized care. We focus on comfort, dignity, quality of life when quantity of life is no longer likely. And those are ongoing conversations that we have with folks. And it doesn't come easy, especially for when the caregiver thinks that maybe I can get another 3-4 years from mama. You're like, what is that 3 or 4 years going to look like? What is she going to have to go through body, mind, and spirit in order just to be here. And so those conversations continually need to take place. So quality of life is certainly a worthy conversation to have when quantity of life is no longer likely. We offer peace of mind for our patients as well as their families and significant others. If there's two things that I hear most often in my work, it's how did we ever not know that hospice does this? And the second thing is, why did we wait so long? Like I said, we do a lot of re-education and a lot of demystification out there. You know, I have heard it said that hospice came in, they gave grandma a shot of morphine and she died in 10 minutes. And, you know, we gently and lovingly have to help folks and realize that, especially caregivers, there is no decision that you will make from this point forward that's going to be the reason for your loved one's death. There is an underlying disease that has been wreaking havoc on her for years and years and years. And at whatever level you think your mother, grandmother can get to again, that baseline is always and gradually reducing over time. So there comes a point in time where you really need to consider quality of life over quantity. I think we do a great job at alleviating fears surrounding death, as talked about with the conversations that we have and the re-education. And then again, the grief support. We're really, really good at our grief support. And then, of course, lastly, the commitment to doing the right thing for the right people at the right time. You know, in closing, I would say that I've had a handful of personal experiences with hospice over the years. My brother died of AIDS in the AIDS crisis of the 1990s. I was in my 20s at the time, and I didn't know about hospice, but I knew that he had hospice. And looking back, the best thing that I remember from that experience is that I couldn't tell who the nurse was, I couldn't tell who the social worker was, and I couldn't tell who the chaplain was. It was just this group of people that came around and loved on him so well and on his mother, and it was just a powerful and a beautiful thing. And then years later, I had another experience with a precious lady from our church, and I watched hospice come in and take such good care of her. And then even more recently, just last summer, my father-in-law, your wife's dad, Bill, passed away in a facility. He did not have COVID, but because of the COVID restrictions, it was just excruciating. And I watched how my wife and brother-in-law suffered unnecessarily. I won't say unnecessarily, but precautionarily, if we can say that. You know, doing the best they can to engage with their dad outside through a window that could crack 2 inches, and trying to lean down over a blaring air conditioner unit. It was just awful. But you know, without hospice on the scene, that was able to go in on a very limited basis, you know, we know that they provided him a lot of dignity and a lot of care. So I can't speak any more highly of hospice. That's all I got. Any questions? Excellent.
Looks like.
Any from the.
Nancy, did you have a question?
Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to say that we have somebody in our circle whose parent died during COVID, and she has had a hard time with the death. You know, they were everybody was shut out of the hospitals during that time, And I think she did not realize that her father was so close to dying, and all of a sudden he had died. And I wanted to ask you about the counseling. I'm hoping she is having counseling, but I don't know that. How do you graciously say to somebody, do you know about the counseling service that hospice provides?
I think you just did. Those words are perfect. If you have a great relationship with that person, I think that out of the care that extends from your heart, the relationship that you've built, I personally think that would be very well received. Whether the answer is yes or no, I think it shows great empathy on your part. The best way I could tell you to do that is if you got a pencil, I'll give you a phone number.
Oh, I do. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
Sure. The 24/7 referral center line is 704-375-0100.
Thank you. That's
You're welcome.
375-0100.
Yes, ma'am. So
Thank
you
you
just,
so much.
by all means, you just say what you said to me to whoever answers the phone, and they'll plug you in with the right person.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think probably all of us at some time or another have had to call on, at least as a pastor, I've called on hospice a lot and had a lot of firsthand experience with the care that hospice gives, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you for what you do. So Gerald has asked me, you can join your family, you can whatever you like to do here, but I'm gonna shift gears just a little bit. Gerald has asked me to kind of summarize what you've done over the last 4 weeks. And I want to start with just a couple of questions. One is, when you heard that we were offering this series on death and dying, what do we call it? What's the official name of this series?
Making faithful decisions at the end of life.
Making faithful decisions at the end of life. When you heard that we were offering this, what were you expecting? What did you get what you were hoping for? Did you learn what you wanted to learn? We've talked theologically, we've talked biblically, we've talked just nuts and bolts, kinds of decisions that you need to make. Are there other issues that you would like to, that you didn't get, that you were kind of hoping you would get? You TV people, I'll ask you as well. Are there other issues that you wish we had discussed? If there are, call Gerald. And she, if we need to put together a follow-up series, I'm sure we will make that happen. And that's question one. Question two I've got is one of the things that I thought was gave me pause and made me think is that in the second session that Nancy Duff led, we talked about the fact that how important it is for us actually to have honest conversations about grief, about lamentation, about loss, about suffering, and so it made me think. And she said, ideally, the church ought to be a place where you can have those conversations. And I think in a way, the church does provide that. Our Stephen Ministry program is available, and often the kind of conversations that Stephen Ministry generates center around those very things, those very issues. Stephen Ministry is broader than that, but at least that's one thing. And then also we do offer once a year the service of wholeness and healing that focuses on that the fact of loss. And the church that I served in Mint Hill, we called it the longest night service because it would often take place around December the 20th, December 21st, which is the shortest day of the year and the longest night of the year. And just kind of getting into a little biblical background. There are people who say that the reason that we celebrate Jesus' birth on December 25th is not because we actually have a calendar and we know exactly what day Jesus was born, but that what was happening is darkness got a bit more and more and more, light got shorter and shorter and shorter, and then Christ was born. And the light began to defeat the darkness, so that just even in nature, from it looks like the darkness is going to win, Jesus is born, no, the light. So we called our service the longest night to acknowledge the gift of light that comes to us through Christ. So that's kind of the focal point of that service. And so I hope do you have that date in your
December 16th.
December 16th, the service will be. There's candle lighting and it has been a very moving service. So you're certainly welcome to participate in that. I have a couple of minutes, and I want to do one of the things that I know, or at least I have some experience with, is Bible stuff. And I've got a Bible thing I want to talk about with you for just a second. It was interesting to me that in the second session on lament and on grieving, suffering, Nancy Duff talked about the Psalms of lament. She didn't mention the fact that we've actually got a book in the Bible that's all about lament, Lamentations. And the setting of that book is that the Jerusalem has fallen to the Babylonians, and it looks like God has pretty much abandoned them. And so out of that experience of suffering and grief and loss, this book of Lamentations comes about. So for a Bible nerd like me, the thing that's interesting about Lamentations is the way it's written. It's got 5 chapters, and it's written in poetic form, 2-line verses. So in each of the 5 chapters, verse 1 begins with A, verse 2 begins with B, C, D, E, except it's Hebrew letters, Aleph, B. And so, unfortunately, if you look in your English Bible, you don't get that. You don't understand that because you can only tell that if you're reading the Hebrew Bible, which most of us aren't. So, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, same thing again. Chapter 3. It intensifies it. AAA, BBB, CCC, DDD. So why do you think the writer would do something like that? There's no right or wrong answer. We don't know what he had in mind or she had in mind. So you got any guesses about why the person would use that kind of form? I've got a couple, but yeah, what do you think, Jonathan?
It was to be memorized.
Sure. So why would you memorize it? Why would that be important to memorize it?
Yeah, to remember the homeland that you're cast out of.
Yeah.
To remember how good God is, and that he hears you.
Sure.
And so to cry out to him in a ordered way.
The focal point of the whole book is focused on God. So it never, even as it acknowledges the pain of that loss, it never moves away from acknowledging the presence of God in that suffering, in that a time of loss. So, and that AAA, BBB, CCC form is a mnemonic device that you can use to, A, you're adorable, B, you're so beautiful. So, you know, kind of, you get to, it kind of reminds you, it's a way to kind of bring to mind, okay. There's some other reasons though, I think. To go from A to Z means you're going to cover the whole waterfront. You're not just going to give it a quick little, oh, you know, it's not that big a deal. No, you're going to acknowledge that it's a big deal all the way to Z, you know, so that it takes suffering and loss seriously. But, and this is where I want to end. I guess he could have done, like on your computer, he could have just done bullet points, you know, but bullet points never have an end. He could have said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and those numbers never have an end. But if you start A, B, C, D, E, F, G, eventually you're going to get to Z. And the idea is that the suffering, as intense as it is never the last word. It never goes on forever. It doesn't go, you know, so that as intense as the pain may be in that moment, the promise of God is that that's not the way, it's not going to be that way forever, that the suffering does have an end. And that's what frankly, the book of Lamentations is a hard book to read because it's about suffering and pain and loss. But I love the idea. I like more the idea behind Lamentations than the actual content of it. But anyway, thoughts about that? We got 1 minute. We got negative 1 minute. Any ideas? So first off, I want to hear from you if you would like to do some follow-up. It occurs to me that one of the things it might be helpful to do is for us to do a Sunday school series or a Bible study series, looking at some of the Psalms of Lament and use that as a jumping off point for talking about our own experiences. If the church is a place where you can safely and honestly talk about your pain and your joys and your suffering or whatever, then the church needs to provide opportunities to do that. Fraser.
That would open the door to suffering, other types of suffering other than suffering due to death.
Exactly. Certainly. Well,
like divorce or,
sure, exactly.
Or long-term medical issues or what have you, which then would be a good opening to say, hey, we've got Stephen's ministry here as if you want additional follow-on. You know, it'd be a great tie-in back to Stephen's ministry.
It would. It certainly would. So if you think you might find that helpful, we'd like to know that and see, you know, what kind of setting we can create to provide those kinds of conversations. Anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
Thank you for doing the series.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Who was that said that?
Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's pray. Loving God, we are grateful for the promise that whatever circumstances of life we find ourselves, in whatever situations we find ourselves, that you have promised that you will be with us. And so we claim that promise and are grateful for the assurance that nothing can separate us from your love. Now, as we make the transition from here to worship, we pray that we will feel your presence there and that we can give thanks to you for the blessings of life that you give to us. And we offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everybody, let's go to church.